And in fact, you can also give a lecture on the military slice, the economic slice, and other cultural slice of the competition, and so on and so forth. But on the military slice, Andy, my response to you is that the Chinese have a very nuanced view of the American military presence in the region. For example, I don't think that the Chinese want you to walk away from your defense alliance with Japan, because an independent Japan will become a nuclear Japan, and they don't want that. So they actually value having the US alliance with Japan. And by the way, both you and I were discussing Kissinger's book on China, and how Mao Zedong actually told Kissinger, you must spend more time in Japan, you must look after Japan. I mean, that's amazing, Mao Zedong saying, Japan is an important country, you must take care of it. So the Chinese have a very nuanced view of these countries. But at the same time, I know the one thing that the Chinese are very, very angry about, and this is a fact, is the aggressive naval patrolling by US naval vessels 12 miles off China's shores. That really upsets them, because whenever any country will do this, by the way. That's right. So they and I actually believe that what you do today, China will do tomorrow. So if you aggressively carry out naval patrolling 12 miles off China's shores, they've already begun, I think, off Hawaii, or Guam, but they will reach California. The Chinese Navy will carry out aggressive naval patrolling of California. And I think that's not necessary. Neither side benefits from it. And of course, the rationale for the American Navy for doing so is that we are protecting freedom of navigation. And ironically, the country that needs freedom of navigation more than America does is the world's number one exporter, which is China. China actually wants greater freedom of navigation than the United States does. So the Chinese will be happy to work with you in that area. But when it comes to the aggressive naval patrolling, or as you know, in the case of planes that fly close to Chinese borders, that's what really upsets them. And they're trying very hard to reach an understanding within that area. Now, South China Sea is another issue, okay? Now, the South China Sea issue is a complicated issue. As you know, several countries are claiming reefs and rocks, and over there are 4 ASEAN countries: Philippines, Brunei, Malaysia, Vietnam, and then Taiwan and China are claiming there. And it's true that the Chinese have been claiming a lot of land in the South China Sea. But the Chinese didn't start this game, by the way. Unfortunately, I say unfortunately because the Malaysians and Filipinos had no idea what would happen. They claimed 2 acres, 3 acres. The Chinese said, okay, you claim, I claim. But the Chinese claimed 2,000 acres. But it's a game that they unfortunately started, and they're stuck with it now. Now, this is how the Chinese are being assertive. Now, if they want to be aggressive, the Chinese can remove the Malaysian, Filipino, Brunei, Malaysian soldiers, Vietnamese soldiers off those islands in 24 hours. They can do it if they really want to be aggressive. And by the way, that's what the United States would have done in 1897. And that, to some extent, shows some degree of restraint now. How will the South China Sea issue be resolved? I can tell you it will be resolved eventually through various kinds of bilateral negotiations. And this has been documented and studied, Andy. In fact, it's in one of your readings, I saw that too. The Chinese have been very generous in their border settlements, except for only the 3 that are not resolved yet. But most of the time, when they resolve border issues, they've been quite generous. They say, okay, you take more, I take less. So that will be part of the negotiations that will carry on. But again, a lot depends on whether or not you're dealing with an angry China that feels is being pushed around, or a China that says, okay, you treat me with respect, I treat you with respect. As honestly as I can. Actually, Taiwan issue is very easy to answer. Because the I didn't have time to say this. The Chinese, and this is all those, if you read Kissinger's book on China and everywhere else, they describe to you, when Chinese look at a problem, they always take a long view. They don't have the American expectation that you can solve problems within one presidential term in 4 years. 4 years is just a drop. They often have a 10-year, 20-year, 50-year perspective. And I'm absolutely certain they have a 50-year perspective on Taiwan. And I think they're going to develop a level of interconnectivity between Taiwan and China that'll be so phenomenal. It already is there, in terms of economic dependence of Taiwan on China, in terms of people traveling from Taiwan to China, China to Taiwan, as you know, millions travel and so on and so forth. So by the time when Taiwan becomes so interconnected with China, the idea of independence will disappear. And they, of course, will be uncomfortable if a non-KMT leader emerges, but they are now confident enough to know, I guarantee you this, no country in the world today is going to recognize Taiwan. No country as an independent country. It will not happen. In fact, the few countries that still recognize the Republic of China are there because China wants to allow Taiwan to save face. And they're still allowed to keep some countries. But those countries, if the Chinese wanted them to switch, they'll switch overnight. Okay, so the Taiwan issue is not a problem in that sense. It'll be managed. And there'll also, by the way, be no conflict on the Taiwan issue. And I think the Taiwanese themselves are also understanding the correlation of forces is working against them, and they have to adapt and adjust. I tell you, even Fred Chen, some of you may know him, you must know him, the former foreign minister of Taiwan, said to me in a Harvard lecture in 1991, now this is 27 years ago, he said, Kishore, all the Chinese have to do is to announce a blockade of Taiwan. The insurance costs of every ship going to Taiwan will be so high, we'll be killed as an economy. So they want to, they can turn off the Taiwanese economy whenever. So Taiwan is not the issue. I think they want to make sure it doesn't become independent, but it's not the one that they worry about. Your first question is a harder one. Why is there increasing repression? And the honest answer I can give you is that at the end of the day, the Chinese believe that for the 1.4 billion people to continue to do well, you need to have a very high degree of political order and stability. And Chinese history teaches you that when the center weakens, the Chinese word for chaos, I think is luan or something like that, chaos returns. So they actually believe, as a principle of China's rule, that strong central control is always necessary. Now, when you talk of, let's say, higher levels of repression, the question is, which is the benchmark you're using? I mean, certainly if you use Mao's times, things obviously are much better. If you look in terms of I don't have the data, I think you do, on the number of political prisoners and so on and so forth. But I would say, on balance, if you go to China on a day-to-day basis, you don't see that in front of you, I would say, when I used to go to China in the early 1980s, there was still a sense of fear. It was there, right? Today, that sense of fear has diminished. And you're right, it's a complex story, but if you give any Chinese government the choice between stability and order or allowing dissent and chaos, they will choose stability and order. And that's what they will do.
I would say you have a very optimistic view of the situation in Taiwan, and you have a very optimistic view of the internal situation in China. You keep saying, if the Chinese are one leader and the people around him now, There are huge members of the elite who are very unhappy. Xi Jinping's father, after 16 years in the Maoist wilderness, came back in the early 80s, and he preached to the party, we will never achieve our goals unless we allow differences of opinion. 不同意见. Despite his preference for Confucianism, which makes Shao, filial piety, so crucial, Xi Jinping has gone against the advice of his father. He was a Chinese too. And there are many Chinese in the elite who are against the current repression, which is why you have the repression. So I think China is a more unstable place, and Xi Jinping knows it better than the rest of us in terms of the corruption, the poverty, the environmental problems. He knows, I think China is a cat on a hot tin roof that has a terrific worldwide PR system right now. So I think we have to be realistic in looking at what's going on in China.
Yeah. Let me tell you where I agree and disagree with you, Jerry. I agree with you that Xi Jinping is acutely aware of the tensions within China. I agree with you that. Let me tell you where I disagree with you. I've heard statements like yours consistently over the last 30 years. People like you have been making these statements about China on a hot tin roof, about to collapse, and so on and so forth. And I would say for 20 years I've been writing that it won't happen. You can go back to my first book, Can Nations Sting? It's a very definitive essay down there saying, you got it wrong. Okay. So that China will keep on growing. It will become stronger. It will remain stable. It will have a bigger economy. It will educate more of its people. It will send more of its young people overseas. More of its young people overseas will go back to the repressive country. It will continue to send not 120 million, but 2 years from now, 200 million Chinese overseas, and 200 million Chinese will return overseas to the repressive society you speak about. So that's the data I give back to you.